The movie begins in a shipyard where a group of gangsters are using one of the storage units for illegal activity. Eddie Black, the leader of the gang, is on the phone telling the person on the other line that he wouldn't be taking any type of deal. He tells the person that he was waiting for a man that he thinks could muscle him out of his property. In the middle of the conversation, one of his men come up to him and inform him that the men were arriving. Eddie has his guests searched and stripped for any weapons, and once his men were sure the guests were clean, Eddie addresses the situation by adamantly telling Robert that he wouldn't be selling his property and that no one could make him do so. And before he knew it, Eddie and his men were receiving heavy gunfire from their guests with firearms, and in minutes all of his men were dead and Eddie was the only one standing alone. Robert has his men hold Eddie as he chops his fingers one by one with a cigar cutter, making him scream in agony. In his lab, Dr. Peyton, along with his assistant Yak Tito, was trying to develop a new type of synthetic skin to be able to assist burn victims. But he's unable to get past a flaw that causes the skin to rapidly degenerate after 99 minutes. Peyton wrecks his brain, trying to understand why his formula wasn't working. At home, Peyton was sitting on the couch with his girlfriend, going through old pictures on a projector. The couple laugh a bit at funny old photos, then go to bed after some passionate lovemaking. In the morning, Peyton brings Julie, who was an attorney, coffee while she talks on the phone. Julie tells her colleague Herb that she found incriminating evidence that proves that Louis had been bribing members out of zoning commissions. On her way out, Peyton follows Julie and asks her to marry him, and he tries to make a convincing point how they're already practically living together, but Julie was reluctant and promises to think about it. She goes to Louis' office and confronts him about the documents that she found about the bribes, but to her surprise, he confesses and he tells her that it wasn't his intention to have the documents slip out. He then shows her his plans to design a brand new city, creating a substantial number of new jobs for the unemployed masses. Louis suggests that Julie give him the documents before she gets hurt because the city's reigning crime boss Robert was actually looking for it. He warns her that having it in her possession could put her life in danger. In his lab, Peyton has a breakthrough with his synthetic skin when an accidental circuit malfunctions and darkens the place, causing the formula of the skin to stay stable. And he was very ecstatic with his new discovery and tries to figure out a way to replicate the results in the dark. When Yakito and Peyton were discussing the phenomenon, a group of men break into the lab and attack Peyton. After having his men rough him up, Robert asks Peyton where the Belisarius memorandum documents are. Feeling pretty confused, Peyton tells him that he doesn't know what he's talking about, but Robert was not convinced. And when Peyton fails to deliver the answer, Robert has his men shoot Yakito in front of him. Robert then has his men search the office and he finds the document mixed with Peyton's papers as he accidentally brought Julie's file to work. Angry, Robert has his men put Peyton in a boiling chemical solution that he was working on until his body was completely disfigured. Before they leave, Robert and his men open up a gas line and set a lighter in front of the toy bird on Peyton's desk so when it leans forward, it would touch the lighter, causing an explosion. Seeing the setup, Peyton drags himself on the floor to the toy bird, but before he can stop it, a spark is ignited, causing a massive explosion. Peyton's burning body is propelled out of the building by the force of the blast and into the lake next to the building. Outside, Julie was coming to see Peyton to give him the answer to his proposal, but is shocked to see the sudden explosion. Days later, Julie stands in front of Peyton's grave, grieving his loss. Peyton was discovered on the riverbank as a John Doe because his body was covered with burns. He was then brought to the hospital and subjected to a radical treatment that cuts the nerves that transmit the stimulus of pain to the brain. As a result, physical pain and the sense of touch are no longer felt by him. Due to the lack of sensation, the brain is starved, causing adrenaline to start coursing through the body unchecked. And this gives the patient increased strength, but also mentally destabilizes him. Peyton wakes up filled with rage and manages to break free of his restraints, and as the alarms sound throughout the hospital, Peyton uses the window and disappears into the night. After he escapes, he manages to find a trench coat in an alley and covers up his frightening body. In the rain, he sees Julie walking across the street and head towards her, and he taps her on the shoulder, and this really scares her and she runs away. Then all he could do was just stand there trying to speak but being unable to do so, and sad by what happened, he goes back to the alley and just lays down in a fetal position while getting soaked by the rain. In the morning, Peyton heads to his lab and is shocked to see that his entire life's work was gone. Realizing that his face was still bandaged up, he finds a mirror to see his reflection and is devastated by the state that he was in. Adamant about saving himself, he tries to salvage whatever he can from his old lab and finds an abandoned building where he can continue his research. There he establishes his lab and begins a long process of digitization to create a mask to his original face. While working on perfecting the synthetic skin, the gauze on his hands catch fire, and Peyton is devastated to realize that he's unable to feel anything. That very same night, Peyton secretly observes the Stark Industries ball, which Julie was also attending. He's crushed when he sees her dance with Louis, his hand firmly gripping her waist. At the ball, Peyton also recognizes Robert and his henchman Ricky, the same men who put his face in acid. Enraged by the sight of the man, Peyton follows Ricky after he leaves the party, and he manages to kidnap him. He drags him down to the sewers and interrogates Ricky until he reveals the identity of all of Robert's henchmen, then kills him by pushing his head out of the sewer line and having a car run over it. For the next few days, Peyton spends his days talking Robert's men and taking pictures of them, and after collecting enough material for the digitizing machine to work, he starts printing the synthetic skin with the face of one of Robert's goons known as Paulie. Once complete, he drags Paulie while he sleeps in his house and heads to an unusual meeting place where the henchmen gather to pass some money. Peyton then manages to convince them that he was indeed Paulie and takes the money. The next day, an angry Robert comes barging into Paulie's house with one of his henchmen, and they find Paulie in his bed just waking up. Robert asks him where the money was, but the confused Paulie tries to convince his boss that he never made the pickup. Robert then finds Paulie's packed suitcase with 2 tickets to Rio and assumes that his employee was trying to flee the country with the money. Enraged by the betrayal, Robert has Paulie thrown out of his apartment window to his death. At his lab, Peyton has a nervous breakdown when he's unable to make the synthetic skin last more than 100 minutes. He tries to calm himself down, and he hears the computer announce that the digital reconstruction process for his face was complete. He then prints out his own face and he wears it to go meet Julie. He finds her at the cemetery, paying her respects, and she sees him across the field and can't believe her eyes. He tries to calm her down by telling her that he wasn't dead, but he just woke up from a coma. And when she realizes that it was him, she hugs him and tells him to never let her go. The two then sit at an outdoor cafe, and Peyton asks Julie if she would still be with him if he was horribly disfigured. Julie tells him that she doesn't know the answer to that, but it didn't matter because he was absolutely fine. And Peyton assures her that he was back with a very big smile. That night, Peyton intercepts a call between Robert and his goons. After recording the conversation, he goes to his lab and practices Robert's voice so he can impersonate him perfectly. The next day, he puts on the face of Robert and gets himself caught on camera while holding a man at gunpoint. The real Robert is then immediately arrested and taken into custody. Peyton then pretends to be Robert and attends a meeting with Hung Fat, just as Robert had planned the night before. He manages to scare off Hung Fat, but he runs into the real Robert as he was hurrying to the meeting after posting bail for his arrest. The two identical men then enter a fist fight while Robert's men watch confused about who to help. Peyton manages to beat Robert, but before he could get away, the synthetic skin on his face starts to melt, and he's forced to run away with the money that he took. The next day, Peyton takes Julie to a carnival so they can spend some time together. He then keeps checking his time to see if he's gonna run out of time soon, and this really annoys Julie. She asks him if they could spend the day and night together, but he tells her that he can't, as he has to go back to the hospital for therapy. Julie asks him if she could be part of his treatment, but Peyton refuses, saying that he didn't want her to see him weak. While trying to win Julie a prize, Peyton loses his temper after an altercation over a stuffed elephant and assaults a worker. And this reveals to Julie that something is wrong with Peyton. And shocked by what he did, Peyton runs away with his face mask smoldering, and Julie follows him to his lab and sees the melting skin on his desk. She yells out that he doesn't have to hide anymore and that she still loves him, and she heads to Louis' office to break off their relationship. She tells him that she can't be with him anymore now that her ex is back, and in the middle of their conversation, Louis receives a phone call and goes out to the other room to take it. While waiting, Julie looks around his desk and she sees the stolen document there, confirming that it was he who was collaborating with Robert the entire time. Louis sees Julie looking at the document and confidently confesses what he did to Peyton and how he's always worked with Robert. He then goes on to say that she's got nothing on him and that even the police force was on his payroll. He then assures her that he won't hurt her and he lets her go, and after she leaves, he informs Robert that Peyton was the reason for their recent problems and orders him to take care of it. Julie heads to Peyton's lab, but before she could see him, Robert's men kidnap her in front of Peyton and take her away. Robert and 2 of his men then use a helicopter to shoot down Peyton's lab, but he manages to escape the blast. He then lures the men into an abandoned building and slowly picks them off one by one. Then Robert tries to flee in a helicopter, but Peyton, dangling with an attached cable, uses uses the cable to crash the helicopter. Impersonating Robert, Peyton meets up with Louis and the kidnapped victim Julie at the top of an unfinished building. But Louis wasn't dumb, as he figures out Peyton's ruse by asking about Robert's actual children, which Robert didn't have. The two men then start fighting, but Peyton eventually gains the upper hand and dangles Louis by his ankle in the air. Louis tries to save his skin by telling Peyton that killing him won't be something that he could live with, but Peyton lets go of Louis' leg, sending him plummeting down dozens of floors, whispering that he'd learned to live with a lot of things. Once the fight was over, Julie asks him to come back to his old life so they can be together, but Peyton refuses. He explains to her that it wasn't just his exterior that changed, but he also felt like a different person. And he was adamant about not wanting to subject anyone to his new aggressive nature, and once the elevator reaches the last floor, he rushes out and disappears into the crowd, putting on a new mask so Julie won't recognize him. And the movie ends with Peyton looking back at Julie lovingly as he is swallowed by the crowd, and in his mind, he knows that he's everyone and no one at the same time. And in the background voiceover, Peyton finally deems himself and declares that he is indeed Darkman.